My special guest today is Dr. Joan Borysenko. She is a world-renowned expert on stress, health, and human potential. Trained as a medical scientist and a psychologist, Joan received her doctorate from Harvard Medical School, where she also completed postdoctoral fellowships in cancer cell biology, behavioral medicine, and psychoneuroimmunology. She was the co-founder and former director of the Mind-Body Clinical Programs at the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston, and a former instructor in medicine at Harvard Medical School. A pioneer in integrative medicine, her work encompasses life balance, creativity, women's health, fitness, and spiritual inspiration. The author of 12 books and numerous audio programs, Joan created the popular national public television special, Inner Peace for Busy People. A much sought-after expert, Joan has appeared on Oprah, Good Morning America, and many other national television shows. Her monthly column, Staying Centered, has appeared in Prevention magazine for the past 5 years. Her most recent book is entitled, It's Not the End of the World, Developing Resilience in Times of Change. So welcome to the Spiritual Cinema Circle. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Marielle. I've been looking forward to this and really looking forward to meeting you.
Oh, you're so sweet. Anyway, in your new book, It's Not the End of the World, you share a very personal story about how the economic downturn affected you. Would you share that story with us?
What a great question. I wasn't expecting it.
There you go.
What happened was this. I had an intuition that this stock market crash was going to come. And you know, I think many of us knew it was bound to come. Our economy was really a house of cards based on buying and selling overinflated homes to each other and not producing. But I kept thinking, got to do something about it, got to do something about it. And then about 2 weeks before the market crashed, I woke up one morning and I can tell you every cell in my body felt like it was on fire. It was like a generalized feeling of, oh my God, I can feel that the market is about to crash. I turned over and said to my husband, I really feel it in my bones. This is such a powerful knowing. We have to sell everything now.
Wow.
And then, of course, always comes the discernment. Is it just your own fear? Or have you tapped into a larger flow?
A collective.
Yes, exactly. And trying to make that discernment between your own fear, your own thoughts, and that greater flow is not so easy.
Right. No.
But here's the kicker.
Hey, I'm so dying to know what you did.
The kicker is this. We asked the outside experts because we said, this is a big deal. Our retirement rests on this. And so we better ask. So we asked several people who were really big experts economically, and they all said, hold on. And here's the thing, I was not comfortable. I felt this kind of heartsick feeling that I often get when I know something is out of tune with the flow. That's right. And it's a bodily knowing, Marielle, don't you think?
Well, there was an earthquake yesterday, and all day my body was holding on. And when it finally happened, I let go. So it's interesting. So I do understand how your body will tell you something, but you're more in tune with figuring out exactly what it is.
Precisely. I'm supposed to be in tune with it. That's how I lead my life. And in the end, we decided to wait it out. And then, of course, the stock market crashed.
Right.
And the humorous side of this, because you have to look for humor, is that my husband and I, the last book that we had written is called Your Soul's Compass. And the question is, what is spiritual guidance? And we'd interviewed like Christians and Jews and Buddhists and Hindus and Quakers, all of who said there's another way of knowing. And that way of knowing requires you to really pay deep mindful attention to everything, including your body.
Right.
And in the end, I didn't trust myself.
Interesting.
So it was a great lesson.
So why do you think that some people bounce back from their hardship and create their best lives, while others will, stress out, melt down, lose hope and health?
That's the big question, isn't it? I remember after 9/11 going to give a spiritual workshop in New York City as soon as the flight started to go again. And do you know the most popular book that I saw over and over again was Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning.
Yes.
And he was really one of the first people who talked about resilience. And he was influenced by the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who said, you know, if there is a why, you can endure almost any how. In other words, if there's a meaning in your experience, then you become resilient because it makes sense to you. It enlarges the space of your understanding. It puts you in touch with something that really holds you. And there's been a huge amount of research on resilience. But here's what really brought me to write the book. I was at a conference, and it was a big conference of successful people, and I was talking to one of the other speakers who said, a friend of his on Wall Street had just jumped out of a window. A guy of about 35, and you've got to think, you know, somebody's husband, somebody's father, somebody's son. I'm going to cry because you think, what a waste of a life. Why would you give up? Because the stock market crashed. Everything goes up, it goes down. It's the nature of life. And then there was a woman at that conference who told me exactly the opposite story. She and her husband had owned a real estate firm and a mortgage brokerage firm, a bad business, and they literally lost everything. They lost their home. They were living in a tiny apartment. And she said, it was actually, she said, not to romanticize poverty and trouble. And yet she said there was such an upside to it. She was spending more time with her kids. She and her husband were entrepreneurial anyhow. They were looking forward to what is the leading edge, what flow could they catch that was actually going to put them more in line with what served others and served their soul. And that's resilience. And I've always been interested in it because of all the work I've done on health and healing. And you can see a person with cancer or a person with AIDS who has that kind of attitude. What can I learn? How can I grow? This is a challenge for me. And these are the people who tell you against all odds, this illness was the best thing that ever happened to me. Versus the ones who say, you know, this is it, I might as well lie down and die right now. So I have been fascinated with resilience for years, and the good news is part of it's genetic, and that is you always know people who just, they bounce back. Somehow the genes are installed, the brain chemistry tends toward resilience. But the good news is, even if you're not resilient in terms of your own neurochemistry and neuroanatomy, it's a skill we can all learn.
Oh, good. That was my
next
question.
That's right.
If can resilience be learned, and if so, what are the steps?
Well, the steps, first of all, are awareness. You have to be aware. Are you a resilient thinker or are you not? So you have to understand what resilience looks like. What are the factors? And fortunately, we understand that. So we can all recall the last election and John McCain. He is actually a resilient person. He was a prisoner of war for 5 years. He, you know, really should have had very bad post-traumatic stress. And that's why a lot of studies have been done on POWs. And you look to see, well, what traits does McCain have? And the one that really stuck out was a sense of humor. He was fabulous on Saturday Night Live. Did you see that?
Yes,
that was
much
cool.
So.
He was really good. And a sense of humor really lets you get out of your ego. It lets you
get out of your head.
It does.
Right?
It gets you get out of your head. You're into the moment, and you can experience joy
rather
than rerunning.
That's true. It's so true. So that would be a key to resilience then.
That's one of the keys to resilience. But here's the other thing. Resilient people really face the facts. They're realists. It actually turns out that optimists are not resilient because they just think life is going to come and support them. Pessimists are not resilient for obvious reasons. You're negative, you can't see opportunity. However, realists are the ones who really are resilient.
They're kind of like, well, it's kind of mindfulness. It's the middle ground. You're looking at both sides. It's
That's a really good way to put it,
Marielle.
It is. It's the key to awareness. And people who say, I can see like the economy is turning down. I own a restaurant supply business. The people aren't eating at restaurants, who are able to say, what else could I do here?
Right, right.
And so they are the resilient people.
Yeah, they are.
And then you mentioned mindfulness, and this is a very important part of it. Right brain skills that allow you to see something bigger, to see various levels of things, and to improvise. People with great improvisational skills are resilient.
Of course,
and that, you know, there's a great mindfulness story about that. That during the Second World War, the intelligence agency, I don't know if they called it the CIA then, what branch of it, but was looking for operatives. And here was the test. While you were in the waiting room waiting for your interview, of course, you know, look around here. There are various pictures, there's a TV, there's lights, there's flowers. They asked the people when they came in for their intelligence interview to describe the waiting room. And those people who noticed, who were attentive, who were mindful, are the ones who they hired. Because without that capacity to pay attention and to be aware, there's no intelligence. It's kind of a great metaphor.
So, well, that leads me to, how would you define spirituality? And is it different for men and women?
Oh, boy, that's a great question. I love this. You are not only fun and beautiful, but you ask the totally most interesting questions. So spirituality is best defined like this. It's not a doctrine, it's not a dogma, it's not a set of beliefs. It's beyond religion, and yet it's a bridge to religions. And if you go deep enough into any religious tradition, you find the spiritual beyond the level of doctrine, beyond the level of dogma. And I think one of the reasons why people have responded so well to Jill Bolte Taylor's book, My Stroke of Insight, and that wonderful video of her on TED.com is because she describes an experience we've all had. And it's an experience of being held by something larger. So for me, for example, during childbirth, there was that moment, a sense of awe and wonder when, my gosh, this new life comes forth. Such a surge of compassion, such a sudden trust that the universe in its mystery was benevolent. And I think the best understanding of spirituality is those feelings of awe, wonder, compassion, love, trust. And it's interesting, there's a great Harvard psychiatrist, George Vaillant, who has studied adaptation to life, how we grow in maturity. And his point is, this constellation of positive emotions through which we mature as human beings is a great definition of spirituality. And I agree with that.
Well, it kind of brings you full circle back to the realist and to the person who has resilience in some ways, because those people would be more inclined to feel more spiritual. When you think.
Well, they would, because when you look for deeper meaning in life, you often begin to encounter the spiritual.
Well, you want to search for something bigger than you.
Bigger than you, and what it
does. But also that you're attached to.
Yes, that you're attached to. And when you're fearful and not resilient, what happens is you get very focused on your own self and your own problems. When you're spiritual, you get much more empathy for others and a compassion, exactly, an expansion in your sense of what the world means and what your place in it is.
Yeah. So I'm going to change gears a little bit here, since we're doing Spiritual Cinema Circle. When did you first fall in love with movies?
What a great question. As a kid, when we used to go to Sunday matinees, and they were fun back then because they'd start one week and then the next week there'd be a continuation.
I grew up with the same thing. It was
you got hooked.
It was once a week, and you just waited to see what was showing.
That's right. Yeah, and you got to see unfolding stories, which was great.
Yeah.
And then, of course, when I grew up, there were all the sagas of cowboys and Indians, and unfortunately, Indians were not shown
in the nicest light.
In the
no,
nicest
it's true.
light.
Well, tell us what some of your favorite all-time movies are.
Okay.
Or the ones that inspired you most.
Well, I would have to say Schindler's List is amongst those, because I'm going to have to steal a line from my husband Gordon, but he said, you know, to see that the flower of goodness can actually take root and come to fruition in the field of evil is an amazing transformation.
It's like a lotus,
and
right?
yes, like a lotus. And there's something about that tells you something about resilience too.
It does,
a belief in just that out of the worst situation, goodness can actually come. So that was a really big one for me. Star Wars was a big one for me. It was, you know, it's all about the hero's journey.
Oh, it's so much the Bhagavad Gita too. I mean, it's such the journey of the, you know, it's very much a warrior Arjuna-esque kind of journey, right?
It really is. Yeah. And it's you think about that, the Gita itself has been, I saw a movie of it years and years ago, and that made a big impression on me. And that was when I actually first read it. It's a fantastic story of wrestling within yourself as to what it is to be fully human.
Right.
Is war allowable? All of these kinds of questions.
Yeah.
And then, you know, a recent movie that I found incredibly inspiring was the Tom Hanks film Castaway.
Oh,
because that, you know, that also shows you that a difficult situation, being downed on a desert island alone, can lead through a tremendous breakthrough. And in fact, when my husband Gordy and I
talk about self-inquiry and
exactly
meeting yourself.
Yes, and you can't get away from yourself for 4 years on a desert island.
Right. You know, I've been known to do that.
It was a fabulous film.
Yes.
And we just thought it was so great. We put it in our book that we wrote called Saying Yes to Change.
Yeah.
When you think about what is change, what is transformation. And I think many good movies have that as a
they usually have an arc, you know, of some sort of deep change. You're absolutely correct.
Absolutely.
That's so wonderful.
What about you? What's the favorite movie that you have? And then I want to know, what's the favorite of the movies you've ever made?
Your interview.
Oh, well.
I know, you're so sweet. You know, the funny thing for me is that there's so many movies, and I interview so many extraordinary people like yourself, that it's usually the movie that they've mentioned. I go, oh, right, that's my favorite movie, and that's my favorite movie. But I'm inspired by a lot of films, and being as I'm in the business, that I get very, you know, I get very drawn to things that are happening right now and things like that. But I have some favorites, but I've got a lot of old favorites, like some old movies. But we'll get back to you.
We'll get back to me.
Do you see films as an opportunity for social connection? And how do you watch films, and where? Do you watch films at home? Do you go to the movie theater? Do you do both?
Yes, and in terms of social connection, I'm laughing because I got up this morning and I said, I know Mariel is going to ask me about my favorite films. And so I woke up saying, Gordy, what are your favorite films? Let's talk about this. So we connected. What are my favorite films? And then I said, I know. I'll paste that question on my Facebook page. So I actually brought with me, by the time we got back from breakfast, I had about 35 responses.
Well, there you go.
People's favorite films. And some of them are interesting. Forrest Gump. And I thought, oh, I loved Forrest Gump.
Right,
what a wonderful film that was. How could I have forgotten it? Of course, Star Wars. Then other things on the list, The Shawshank Redemption.
Fabulous
It was a fabulous film. I loved that. Contact with Jodie Foster. Something about, that mystery. And of course, what is it in your early life, you know, that kind of sets your life purpose? Because for her, it was the death of her mother in that film. Then Dead Man Walking, The Green Mile. These are all redemptive when you think about who people are who land in prison and what that is about.
And that transformation.
That transformation.
That resilience.
Tremendous resilience.
What's interesting about you bringing this up, that you brought it up from Facebook,
Yes.
that couldn't be more of a social connection.
Well, that's
I mean,
just it.
There's a social network that
Exactly.
I mean, I Twitter, which is scary and sad and obsessive, but what's very interesting about it is that you have this dialogue with people.
I love that.
It's fantastic. So you do kind of get this, like if you need help figuring out what your moves are, like I'm totally blank, you get feedback, and it's a wonderful way to kind of connect with people. And films have that power to make you feel connected.
And when people would talk about what they loved about the film, then already there were cross conversations happening on my Facebook page.
Right.
And I'm making the list saying, hey, there are films here I actually haven't seen that now I'm going to go back and see.
Right.
And it was the speed with which people responded to this inquiry. What's your favorite transformational film? Shows me how transformational films are, because this was probably the most popular of my inquiries. I like to, about twice a week, I post an inquiry like what is surrender.
So out of your little research this morning of 2 minutes, what do you think was the most the film that had the most positive impact on society?
The film,
based on what?
The film that got mentioned most frequently, there were actually two of them that came up over and over again. One was The Matrix. Which,
yes.
Yes.
We'll talk about another one that is completely on a whole spiritual, like otherworldly.
Yes.
Powerful.
Yes. That very powerful. And Forrest Gump came up repeatedly.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was.
My husband used to call himself Forrest Gump. I never knew what that meant. Why do you do that? Anyway, so what kind of films do you think young people should watch, and why?
Oh, what great questions. I think young people need to watch more films, for example, like Forrest Gump, or like, I've only seen the trailer for The Soloist, but that came up 4 times,
Unbelievably beautiful film.
Yes.
Unbelievably powerful. Not to mention the music is stunning, and he's an unbelievable actor. But quite a powerful transformation film. Really, I mean, well done. That's a really good film.
It's a good film, and I think kids need to see more films. I haven't seen that. I believe people. We can't wait to see it. But films that are actually based on some true life person, because kids
I think you can
role
relate
models.
and I think you can relate to it, and that's a powerful film.
Yeah. And then films like Star Wars, don't you think that was an amazing film for kids?
Oh, it was
and
wonderful.
It gives you a sense like,
I remember being so excited seeing the first Star, because that was back before it was, it's pretty rote now. We just sort of take it for granted that we're going to see all kinds of explosions and things and other planets. But back in the day, I remember thinking, I've never seen anything like this. This was otherworldly in a way that now we sort of think of, whatever.
That's right.
But it was really powerful.
It was very powerful.
So what are your thoughts about Spiritual Cinema Circle and how we can provide positive messages?
I think it's a wonderful idea because it's everything we were just talking about. And what I love about many of the Spiritual Cinema Circle films is that they're short, because people also need that. We need to be able to say, I just need a little hit of inspiration. I'm going to watch this film. And
so true.
Because some of them are really true life stories.
Yeah,
and you look about,
absolutely true.
For example, this is not a movie. Maybe it will become a movie. It's a book, but 3 Cups of Tea. We all want to see
so wonderful.
Fabulous stories about people who've made a difference. People who are not much different than we are, who've been able to pull off something great.
If you could make a movie for, money, talent, and everything else were no obstacle, what would you make? Do you think it would be that film? Or?
I'll tell you the film that I would make. A very dear friend of mine, Robin Kasarjan, started a foundation 15 years ago called Lionheart, and it was to teach forgiveness and emotional literacy to prisoners. And her vision, she wrote a book called Houses of Healing. And the whole idea is that prisons should be houses of healing, not graduate schools in violence. And the story of every prisoner almost always starts as an abused child. And then it's handed from generation to generation. You have whole families that end up in prison. And so she teaches mindfulness, forgiveness. She has such a stunning program for prisoners that's been happening for 15 years. And then the prisoners, their stories are so gorgeous, so frightening, and yet so transformational in terms of people who really get into that program and go deeply into healing whatever was in terms of the basic wound that's been handed down. And you see how the healing moves backwards through generations,
made this film
forward.
already.
I'd love to make it.
I think you should make this film.
I'd love it. And then the prisoner said to her, it's great to start with us, but like we're already in jail. Why don't you start with youth at risk? So she wrote a book along with one of her nieces who's done a lot of work with kids called Power Source. And everybody said, you're writing a book for at-risk kids? They don't read. There are some stories that would make you weep of kids who learned to read because they wanted to read that book because they'd heard from their friends. And it just gives them the same framework that we all need.
And like you said, they can relate to it because it's a story that they...
And it's all the
Well,
stories
if you don't make this film, I'll make
like
this film and I'll call you.
All right,
make you
please
be part of it. It sounds amazing.
But it does go one step further, and here's the cool thing, and it would make a great film because you see all these 3 steps. Robin said to herself, it doesn't start with at-risk kids. It starts with older at-risk kids who become the parents, mostly the teenage mothers of the next generation. So now she's got a program called Power Source Parenting. And these are not just books, they're programs.
Oh, it sounds amazing.
And they've taken root all across the country. And there are so many stories. Robin had no money. What she had was a really good heart and a really bright mind. And look what she has done. How many people are out there. And it's been wonderful. Wonderful progression over 15 years. And that's what we need to know. You don't have to be somebody famous to pull off something that changes the world.
No, you certainly don't. You're extraordinary. What a delight to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
You're so welcome.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
I love this.
Yeah, it was really great.